Alright, so I've been playing the Modern Warfare 4 beta, and instead of just throwing a bunch of benchmark numbers at you, I wanted to see how this game actually scales on a really high-end system. So we're going to start by establishing a baseline at 4K with basically everything maxed out. This gives us the best the game can look and something to compare everything else against. Then I'm going to start pulling settings back and looking at the actual visual difference versus how much performance we gain. Because especially in a multiplayer game, there's really no point in cutting your frame rate in half for a graphic setting that you barely notice while you're playing. After that, we're going to go the complete opposite direction and see just how far we can push the frame rate on a system like this. So we'll start with the graphics. This is native 4K at the extreme preset. Everything's turned up as high as it'll go. This is important because I want to establish what the game looks like at its absolute best before we start taking things away. The graphics are really impressive. We're getting around 80 to 90 FPS. It's not that bad considering we're in native 4K with everything cranked up to the max, but I'm playing on a 240Hz display and I can definitely feel that 80 to 90 FPS. There's ghosting, a little blur in motion, especially when turning quickly or tracking players. So visually, this is our target. This is as good as the game's gonna look. So the question becomes, how close can we stay to this while getting a lot more performance? First thing I tested was DLSS. Everything else is still cranked up, but we're using DLSS4 in quality. DLSS4 is amazing, and I think even when it's upscaling, it looks better than native. We're getting a tiny bit more performance here, but not much. Visually looks better, so I would use this anyways over native. Next, I tried turning down ray tracing. Even with ray tracing set to low, there's a pretty substantial performance cost. And I got to admit, it does look pretty good. The lighting changes, certain areas look different, and if you're specifically looking for those differences, you'll see them. My problem with ray tracing in this kind of game is the game looks pretty without ray tracing too. It almost feels like a horizontal move, like a side grade, rather than a huge visual upgrade. So one version looks one way, the ray traced version looks a little bit different, but I don't necessarily look at one and think immediately one's massively better than the other, you know? So for multiplayer, I can't really justify it. For campaign mode, definitely I would. If I'm playing on single player and I want the best looking version of the game, I would definitely turn this on. But for multiplayer, I'm already leaning towards turning it off because the cost is so high here. So now we've got ray tracing completely disabled, and the frame rate is nearly double. And to me, the game doesn't look anywhere close to twice as bad. So what I'm trying to do with all these tests is not really just ask the question, does the higher setting look better? That answer is always going to be yes. Does it look better to the point that it justifies what it costs? And in this case, I don't think it does. I'm getting a huge performance improvement, and the actual experience visually, I mean, it doesn't even look that much worse. So for multiplayer, ray tracing is going to be off. Let's see. I've moved DLSS down to balance now, and again, it doesn't look that much worse. If I freeze the footage and maybe start looking for differences, I'm sure I'll find them. But just running around and playing, it really, I probably wouldn't even be able to notice the difference. And we're getting another roughly 30 to 40% improvement in performance here. So we're starting to approach the 200 FPS mark at 4K. And on a 240 hertz display, the difference in how the game feels compared to that original 80 to 90 FPS experience is pretty large. And this is the kind of trade off I'm looking for doing this kind of testing. I'm not trying to make the game look terrible, I just want to get that FPS number a little bigger. So I want to know how much performance we can gain before I actually start missing the visual quality we had at the beginning. Even at DLSS balanced, I don't really feel like I'm missing out visually. So at this point, I think we've established you don't necessarily need to max this game out to make it look really good. There are some extremely expensive settings that I would personally turn down or disable for multiplayer, and we're already getting much better performance because of that. So now I'm going to stop being practical. I want to see what happens when we take a really powerful system like this, a 9950X3D2 with a 5090 and 64 gigs of RAM, and push it a little. Just for the hell of it, I turned on 6x frame generation. Since we're starting at around 200 FPS for the base frame rate, that means the added input latency is going to be something like 3 to 5 milliseconds at most. Unless you're an esports player or super highly competitive, I'm going to say 99% of people won't be able to tell the difference between like 20 milliseconds and 23 milliseconds, okay? And you won't feel it in your gameplay. So yeah, 6x frame generation, and now we have 600 FPS Call of Duty. The responsiveness still essentially feels exactly the same as before turning on frame generation, but visually it is butter smooth. No matter how fast I whip around the camera, look around the map, there's no ghosting at all. Everything is super clean, and visually it's hard to get better than this. So yeah, even for multiplayer, I would probably leave frame generation on. For those of you who prefer to just have those few milliseconds back, just leave it off. It's still gonna look really great at 200 FPS.